My husband filed for divorce 3 days after my cancer diagnosis. Now he wants to withdraw it because I'm cured? He told me on a Tuesday. I had been diagnosed on a Friday. 3 days. He gave me 3 days with a cancer diagnosis before he sat me down at our kitchen table and said he'd already contacted a lawyer. He said he'd been thinking about it for a while and the diagnosis just made him realize life was too short to be unhappy. Those were his exact words. Life was too short. I was the one with stage 2 breast cancer and he was the one worried about life being too short. We'd been married for 12 years, together for 14. I was 38 and staring at months of chemotherapy, and he was telling me he needed to find himself. His name is Dominic. I need you to remember that name because you need to understand the kind of man who looks at his wife after she gets the worst news of her life and thinks about himself. I asked him if there was someone else. He said no. He said he just couldn't handle what was coming. He said watching someone go through treatment wasn't something he was built for. He actually said that. He wasn't built for it, like I was. Like I woke up one morning and decided I was built to have poison pumped through my veins for 6 months. The divorce papers arrived 2 weeks later. I was already into my first round of chemo. I could barely keep water down, and a man in a polo shirt was at my front door handing me legal documents. My sister Colette drove down from 4 hours away that same week. She moved into my guest room and didn't leave for 7 months. She went to every single treatment with me. She held a bucket in the car when I couldn't make it home before getting sick. She shaved my head when it started falling out in clumps because I couldn't stand watching it happen slowly. She cooked food I couldn't eat just so there was something in the fridge in case I had a good hour. Dominic moved into an apartment 6 miles away. He took half the furniture. While I was doing my second round of chemo, he came by the house when Colette was picking up my prescriptions and took the television from the bedroom. He left a note on the nightstand that said he'd come back for the rest of his things later. I was in bed. I heard him come in. I heard him unplug the television and carry it out. He didn't come into the room to check on me. He didn't say a word, just took the television and left. Colette came home and found me staring at the empty wall where the screen used to be. She called Dominic and told him the next time he wanted to take something from the house, he could go through her. He never came back for anything else. I signed the divorce papers from a hospital bed during my 4th round of chemo. My hands were shaking so bad from the medication that my signature barely looked like mine. My lawyer handled everything else. I didn't ask for much. I kept the house because it was mine before the marriage. I kept my car. He kept his. We split the savings. I didn't fight him on anything because I was too busy fighting to stay alive. The divorce was finalized 5 months after he filed. I was still in treatment. He didn't attend the hearing. His lawyer showed up on his behalf. Mine attended over the phone because I was too sick to leave my bed that day. I finished treatment 3 weeks after the divorce was finalized. Then came the waiting. Scans every 3 months, blood work, checkups. Every appointment felt like standing in front of a firing squad wondering if this was the day they pulled the trigger. Colette stayed for 2 more months after treatment ended just to make sure I could function on my own. When she finally drove home, I sat on my porch for a long time and realized that I had survived the worst year of my life, and the man who promised to be there in sickness and in health had taken a television off my bedroom wall while I was too weak to stand up. 8 months after treatment ended, I got the call. Full remission. No detectable cancer cells. My oncologist said I was one of the strongest patients she'd ever treated. I cried in the parking lot for 20 minutes. I called Colette first. She screamed so loud I had to pull the phone away from my ear. I called my mother. I called my 2 closest friends. I did not call Dominic. He found out anyway. I don't know who told him. 2 days after my remission news, he sent me a text. 1 line. I'm so happy for you. I didn't respond. A week later, another text. I've been doing a lot of thinking and I made the biggest mistake of my life. I didn't respond to that one either. Then the calls started. I let every single one go to voicemail. The voicemails were long. He missed me. He was wrong. He panicked. He wasn't strong enough at the time, but he'd changed. He wanted to try again. He said he never stopped loving me. The man who carried a television past his wife's sick room door wanted me to know he never stopped loving me. After 2 weeks of silence from my end, Dominic showed up at my door. He looked thinner, older around the eyes. He was holding flowers, lilies, my favorites. The fact that he remembered what kind of flowers I liked while forgetting what kind of vows he made almost impressed me with its selective memory. I didn't invite him in. I stood in the doorway with one hand on the frame and looked at him. He said he knew I was angry. He said he deserved it. He said he had spent the last year and a half hating himself for what he did. He said he went to therapy. He said his therapist helped him understand that he had an avoidance response to trauma and that the diagnosis triggered a fight or flight reaction, and he chose flight. He had vocabulary for it now, clinical terms. He had rehearsed this speech. I could tell because his eyes kept drifting up and to the left, the way they always did when he was reciting something from memory. He said he wanted to try again. He said he knew the divorce was finalized, but that people remarried all the time. He said we could start over. He said he was different now. He said he understood what he had done, and he would spend the rest of his life making it up to me. He said he had already looked into it. He said remarriage after divorce was more common than people thought. He said he had talked to his therapist about it, and his therapist said it was possible if both people were willing. He said he had even found a couples counselor who specialized in relationships recovering from major life events. He had a name and a phone number written on a card in his back pocket. He pulled it out and held it toward me like it was proof that he was serious. I didn't take it. He kept holding it between us. The card shook slightly in his fingers. He said he had also been going to a support group for people who failed their partners during medical crises. He said there was a whole community of people who had done what he did. He said knowing he wasn't alone in it helped him understand his behavior. I almost asked him if there was a support group for the partners who got abandoned, but I didn't because it wasn't worth the energy. I let him finish. Every word. I didn't interrupt once. When he was done, I asked him one question. I asked him what he did on March 14th. He blinked. He said he didn't know. He said he didn't remember what was special about March 14th. I told him March 14th was my 4th chemo session. The bad one. The one where they had to adjust the dosage because my body was rejecting the treatment. The one where Colette held my hair back in the hospital bathroom even though most of it was already gone. I told him March 14th was the day I signed the divorce papers he sent me. I told him that while I was in a hospital gown with an IV in my arm trying to hold a pen steady enough to end my own marriage, he was at a restaurant called Ventura on the west side of town having dinner with a woman named Brooke Calloway. He went white. I told him I knew because Colette's friend saw them. She didn't say anything at the time because I was too sick, and everyone had agreed not to add to my stress. But after I finished treatment and started getting stronger, Colette sat me down and told me everything, not just the one dinner. Brooke Calloway was a paralegal at a firm 3 blocks from Dominic's office. She was 31 years old. She had long brown hair and ran half marathons and posted pictures of her meals on Instagram. I knew all of this because after Colette told me, I looked her up. I'm not proud of that, but I did it anyway. I found her profile and scrolled through months of photos and found what I was looking for. A picture posted 5 weeks after my diagnosis. A selfie at a wine bar. In the reflection of the window behind her, sitting across the table with his hand on her arm, was my husband. He was smiling. The timestamp on the photo was 8:47 p.m. on the night Dominic had texted me saying he was working late and couldn't bring me the heating pad I asked for because my bones ached so bad from the chemo that I couldn't sleep. I showed Colette the photo. She zoomed in. She sat back in her chair and pressed her hands against her face and didn't speak for a full minute. Then she looked at me and said, "What do you want to do?" I said I wanted to get better first, and I did. But while I was getting better, I kept looking. I found more. I went through our old cell phone records that were still accessible through the family plan Dominic hadn't bothered to cancel. I found 347 text messages between his number and a number I didn't recognize between the date of my diagnosis and the date our divorce was finalized. 347. During the 7 months I was in active treatment. Some of those texts were sent at 2 a.m. Some were sent from the parking lot of the hospital where I was receiving chemotherapy. I know this because one of the messages to her said just dropped off her meds, free for the rest of the night. He had come to the house that day. He had left a bag of prescriptions on the kitchen counter while I was asleep. Colette had been out getting groceries. He stayed for less than 4 minutes. I know because Colette had a doorbell camera and I checked the footage. 3 minutes and 41 seconds. He walked in, set the bag down, walked out, drove to Brooke Calloway's apartment. That night he told me by text that he wished he could have stayed longer, but work was crazy. 3 minutes and 41 seconds was all I was worth between dropping off Hills and driving to someone else. Dominic was still standing on my porch. The flowers were shaking in his hand. He said it wasn't what I thought. He said Brooke was a friend from work. He said they had gone to dinner a few times, but nothing happened. He said it was over before it started. I held up my hand. I told him I didn't come back from stage 2 breast cancer to stand on my porch and listen to a man explain to me why his dinner dates with another woman while I was in chemotherapy weren't that bad. I told him I had the photo. I told him I had the text messages he sent me on the same nights he was with her. I told him every single lie had a timestamp and I had matched them all. 22 nights. I had a list. 22 nights where Dominic told me he was working late or having drinks with his buddy or stuck in traffic or too tired to come by. 22 nights where he was with Brooke Calloway while I lay in bed alone wondering why my husband couldn't even bother to check on me while I was dying. He started crying, standing there on my porch with those lilies in his hand and tears running down his face telling me he was sorry and that he hated himself. He said the relationship with Brooke was a mistake. He said he ended it months ago. He said she meant nothing. He said I was the love of his life. He said he was weak and scared and he handled everything wrong. He said the cancer terrified him. He said watching me get sick made him feel helpless, and he dealt with it the worst way possible. He said all the right words in all the right order. He had clearly practiced these too. I looked at him crying and I felt nothing. Not anger, not sadness, not satisfaction, just a vast and total emptiness where something used to be. Like looking at a room where furniture had been removed and seeing only the indentations in the carpet. Something was there once. It wasn't anymore. I told him I knew about the parking lot. His crying slowed. I told him I knew he texted Brooke from the hospital parking lot after dropping off my medication. I told him I had the doorbell footage showing he spent 3 minutes and 41 seconds in our house before leaving to go to her. I told him I had the cell phone records. All 347 texts. He wiped his face. The tears stopped. Something behind his eyes shifted. He realized this wasn't a woman who was hurt. This was a woman who had built a case. He asked how I got the phone records. I told him he never took me off the family plan. His mouth opened slightly, then closed. He hadn't thought of that. I told him to go home. He said he wouldn't leave until we talked about this properly. I said we just did. He said this wasn't a conversation. He said I was shutting him out. I told him he shut me out when he walked past my bedroom door carrying a television and didn't say a single word to his wife who was too weak to stand. I told him he shut me out when he sent a process server to my house while I had chemo drugs in my bloodstream. I told him he shut me out 22 times while he sat across from another woman and told me he was somewhere else. I told him I had nothing left to shut. He stood there for a long time. Then he asked if there was anything he could do. I said yes. I said he could leave the lilies on the step and never come back. He put the flowers down. He walked to his car. He sat in the driver's seat for 15 minutes before he drove away. I watched from the window because I wanted to see him leave. I needed to see him leave. The next week his mother called. Her name is Vivian and she had always liked me more than I liked her. She said Dominic was devastated. She said he had made mistakes but that everyone deserved a second chance. She said I should think about what I was throwing away. I told Vivian that her son left me while I had cancer and was sleeping with another woman within 5 weeks of my diagnosis. The line went so quiet I thought she had hung up. Then she said that can't be true. I said it was. She said Dominic told her he left because he couldn't handle the emotional toll. I said that was one way to describe it. I said another way was that he replaced me before I was even done with my first round of treatment. Vivian started crying. She said she was going to kill him. She said she had defended him to her entire family, told everyone he was struggling, told everyone he was a good man in a terrible situation. She said she had lost friends over defending him. I told her I was sorry she had been lied to. I told her I understood because I had been lied to for a lot longer. She said she would talk to him. She said maybe there was a way to fix this. I said there wasn't. I said the divorce was final, and so was I. She asked if I could ever forgive him. I told her forgiveness wasn't the issue. I told her the issue was that I signed divorce papers during chemotherapy for a man who told me he couldn't handle my illness while he was sleeping with someone else. I told her that I split our savings $42,000 each because I was too sick to fight and too exhausted to care, and that Dominic took that money knowing exactly why I wasn't pushing back. I told her he let a woman with cancer give him an easy divorce so he could start his new life faster. She was sobbing by then. She said she didn't raise him to be this way. I told her I believed that. I told her I also believed that what people do when no one is watching tells you you more about them than what anyone raised them to be. She said she was going to call him right now. She said there would be consequences. 2 days later, Colette called me laughing. She said Dominic's mother had shown up at his apartment with his aunt and his older brother Frank, and they had confronted him about Brooke. She said Frank called him a coward in front of his neighbors in the hallway. She said Vivian told him she was ashamed to be his mother. She said Dominic's aunt, who was a breast cancer survivor herself, told him she hoped he never found a woman willing to put up with him. She said Dominic tried to deny it, and Vivian showed him the text I had sent her with the Instagram photo of Brooke with his reflection in the window. Colette said Frank called her afterward and asked for my number. He wanted to apologize on behalf of the family. I told Colette to tell Frank I appreciated it, but that apologies from people who didn't do anything wrong weren't the ones I needed. The family took sides quickly after that. Vivian stopped speaking to Dominic for 2 months. Frank uninvited him from Thanksgiving. His cousin Angela, who had organized a meal train for him when he moved out because she thought he was struggling with the emotional weight of my illness, found out the truth and sent him a text that said, "You made me cook for you while your wife had cancer, and you were cheating on her. I hope every meal I made tasted like guilt." I heard about all of this secondhand. I didn't seek any of it out, but small towns talk and our circle wasn't that big. I thought about that question for a long time after we hung up. I thought about it while I made dinner. I thought about it while I took my evening walk. I thought about it while I sat on the porch where he had stood with his lilies looking at me like I was the answer to a problem he had created. The truth is, I don't know if I forgive him. I know that I don't hate him. Hate requires energy, and I spent all of mine staying alive. What I feel for Dominic now is something quieter than hate and colder than indifference. It's the feeling of looking at someone who used to be the center of your world and realizing they were just furniture, present in the room but not holding anything up. The following month, Dominic's lawyer contacted my lawyer about the possibility of reconciliation. He wanted to know if I would be open to mediation. He wanted to know if there was a path to remarriage. My lawyer called me and relayed the message and then waited for my response. I told her to send back one sentence: "The divorce is final." 2 weeks later, I got a letter in the mail from Dominic, handwritten, 4 pages. He talked about our wedding day. He talked about our first apartment. He talked about the trip we took to the coast where we stayed in that tiny hotel room and ate crab legs on the balcony. He talked about the way I laughed and the way I sang in the car and the way I looked at him when things were good. He said he would give anything to go back. He said he would sit in every chemo chair beside me if he could do it again. He said he would hold the bucket. He said he would shave my head. He said he would be the man I needed him to be. I read the letter once, then I folded it and put it in a drawer with the note he left on my nightstand the day he took the television. I keep them together. The note that says I'll come back for the rest of my things later, and the letter that says I would give anything to go back. I keep them in the same drawer because they were written by the same man and they both say exactly the same thing. Dominic only values what he's already lost. 3 months after the letter, I was at the grocery store and I saw Brooke Calloway in the produce section. I recognized her immediately from her Instagram. She was holding a bag of avocados and talking on the phone and laughing at something the person on the other end said. She had a yoga mat tucked under one arm. She looked healthy. She looked unbothered. She looked like a woman who had never spent a single night wondering if the man lying next to her had a wife at home connected to a chemo drip. She didn't know who I was. She had no idea that the woman standing 6 feet away from her was the wife of the man she had been dating while that wife was fighting for her life. I wondered if Dominic had ever mentioned me to her. I wondered if she knew I existed during those 22 nights. Or if he had told her he was single. I wondered if she had ever asked about the tan line on his ring finger. I stood there looking at her for about 10 seconds. Then I picked up my tomatoes and walked to the register. She wasn't worth my time either. None of them were. Last week I had my 18-month scan. Clean. Still in remission. My oncologist smiled and said she'd see me in 6 months instead of 3. I drove home with the windows down and the music loud. I pulled into the driveway of my house. The house I kept. The house I paid for. The house where I lay alone night after night while chemicals burned through my body and my husband burned through our marriage. I walked inside and put my keys on the counter and stood in the kitchen for a moment just breathing. My phone buzzed. A text from Colette. How did it go? I typed back one word, clean. She sent back 17 exclamation points and a voice memo of her screaming. That night I sat on the porch again, the same porch where Dominic stood with his flowers. The air was warm and the street was quiet, and I thought about the past 2 years and everything I had survived. I survived the diagnosis. I survived the chemo. I survived the abandonment. I survived signing divorce papers with hands that couldn't hold a pen. I survived hearing my husband tell me he wasn't built for this. I survived all of it. And the man who left is still sending letters to a woman who stopped reading them. My phone buzzed again. Dominic. Another voicemail I would never listen to. I deleted it without pressing play and went inside and locked the door. Some people only want to come back once you've proven you can survive without them.